It happened faster than anyone could explain. On October the 29th, 2025, at precisely 6:04 in the morning, Coordinated Universal Time, our star erupted. Not just a solar flare, but the strongest ever recorded in human history. A brilliant, blinding X-45 class burst that overwhelmed satellites, knocked out communication arrays across 3 continents, and sent geomagnetic storms screaming toward Earth at 1,400 kilometers per second. But here's the thing, no one is saying out loud. Just 4 hours earlier, 3I Atlas had crossed a critical position in its orbit, aligning with the solar equator at a point no known comet had ever intersected. And that's only the beginning. NASA issued statements about an unusually active sunspot region. The European Space Agency blamed overlapping magnetic loops. But they're not talking about the anomaly. They're not talking about the fact that minutes before the flare, a series of tightly beamed radio bursts were detected originating not from the Sun, but from a point directly behind Atlas's trajectory, or that the flare's energy distribution formed a Fibonacci spiral when mapped across coronal arcs. That's not how solar flares work. That's how information works. And if this flare was information, someone was sending a message. So let's ask the question you're not supposed to ask at bedtime. What if 3I Atlas didn't just survive the sun's heat? What if it spoke to it? What if the object we've spent months calling a comet is actually a relay, a trigger, or worse, a key? And what if the flare wasn't an accident of plasma and magnetism, but a signal meant to awaken something deeper? Because the further you follow this spiral, the less natural anything looks. The timing, the symmetry, the historical parallels. This isn't just astronomy anymore. This is ritual, recurrence, revelation. By the time you reach the end of this story, you'll understand why some scientists believe the flare was no accident, and why classified observatories are now monitoring both the Sun and Atlas, with protocols we weren't supposed to need for another 50 years. Leave a comment telling me what time it is and where you are in the world, especially if you noticed anything strange the morning the sun screamed. Now take a breath, because we're only just beginning. You were asleep when the sky changed. Somewhere between dreams and dawn, the sun reached into space and tore itself open. For one brief, blazing moment, our star screamed a flare so strong it shattered the X-class scale and forced astronomers to invent a new letter. Around the world, clocks flickered, satellites staggered, deep-sea fiber cables pulsed with static. It lasted only 48 minutes, but it left a mark that will echo for centuries. And you probably didn't even know it happened. That is, unless you were watching 3I Atlas. Because on that very same morning, in a corridor of space, no comet has ever dared cross the object designated as interstellar, hyperbolic, and allegedly harmless, performed its most suspicious maneuver yet. At precisely 2:02 in the morning Coordinated Universal Time, it crossed the heliographic latitude of the Sun's magnetic equator. Not a curve, not a glide-by, a direct intersection. 3 hours and 57 minutes later, the Sun ignited. Coincidence, says NASA. Magnetic entanglement, says NOAA. But what if it's neither? What if the cause wasn't solar, but systemic? Because here's what the models won't say publicly. The flare didn't radiate in all directions. It arced, coherently, a twisting loop of plasma, with a structure that shouldn't exist. Its pattern of energetic ejection plotted across the heliosphere forms not a chaotic spiral, but a logarithmic curve. That's the mathematical signature of intention. And the flare's path? It points backward, toward Atlas. This isn't just a solar event. It's a handshake. Let's rewind. When the Parker Solar Probe skimmed the corona in 2024, it detected unusual Doppler drifts in charged particles near the solar equator narrowband waveforms with phase-locked symmetry. Most researchers chalked it up to internal solar resonance, but a team at Kyoto University, reviewing that data last month, found something unsettling. Those waveforms had harmonics. Ratios, not common in solar plasma behavior, but found frequently in artificial signal modulation. In other words, not heat, code. And now, 1 year later, 3I Atlas crosses the same region, and the sun erupts in a form that mirrors those harmonics exactly. That would be anomaly 1. Anomaly 2 is this. During the flare's peak, a narrow band of high-frequency radio bursts were detected across 3 observatories in Argentina, Antarctica, and Greenland, independently verified. The bursts lasted 26 seconds, repeating once every 13, and their point of origin, an Lagrange orbit shadowed behind Atlas's arc, not from the Sun, not from Earth, a dead zone, unless something was hiding. Anomaly 3. The flare's polar aurora effect. Normally, X-class solar events produce visible auroras at mid-latitudes. But this time, the light skipped entirely over expected zones and instead created circular plasma rings over the South Pacific glowing spirals that rotated in perfect opposition to Earth's magnetic field. No known mechanism explains this, but simulations run through the ESA's Prometheus server showed that such behavior would emerge if the Earth's magnetosphere was being shaped externally by a gravitational interference field. Where would that field come from? You already know the answer, but here's where the picture bends toward the truly mythic. Ancient solar temples in Bolivia, particularly the Kalasasaya complex near Tiwanaku, were built to align with equinox solar events across precisely those southern skies. For centuries, those alignments have puzzled archaeologists, but this week, the circular auroras appeared exactly in line with those ancient structures, same azimuth, same timing, and their pattern, Fibonacci spirals, 4 of them, just like the 4 solar gates described in Sumerian cylinder seals, the ones scholars said were metaphorical. But you're no longer allowed to say metaphor when the sky literally draws the same shapes. The flare's origin point on the Sun, region AR 3466, a sunspot cluster that, up until 3 days ago, was quiet, dormant, magnetically unremarkable. But on the 28th of October, high-resolution images from the Solar Dynamics Observatory showed a sudden spike in complexity, a change in the magnetic topology so abrupt it resembles phase transition. It went from linear filaments to twisted, nested loops. In physics, we call this flux rope instability. In nature, we call it impossible without external input. This is not random, but ask yourself this. If 3I Atlas is not just a comet, what is it doing? Some scientists have begun whispering the forbidden phrase, stellar engineering. You heard that right. Because when you map Atlas's entry arc, it does not trace the chaotic, meandering hyperbolic path of a random interstellar object. Instead, it lines up with precision to known zones of heliomagnetic stress, as if drawn to them, targeted, like a device following waypoints in a system it already understands. And the date of the flare? October 29th. On the ancient Egyptian calendar, that marks the festival of Sika, a ritual honoring the rebirth of the sun after descent into chaos. Is it coincidence that the sun's most violent awakening in recorded history coincided with a comet from Sagittarius, the region associated with ancient sky gods, and their return? No one is asking these questions on official channels, but you are, right now, lying in bed, listening, wondering why it suddenly feels like something very old has resumed transmission. The sun is no longer silent, and neither is Atlas. Let's strip away the comfort of metaphor, because what happened on October the 29th was not a flare, not in the way you were taught, not in the language of solar physics textbooks or neatly diagrammed field line reconnection models. What occurred was more akin to a release, a calculated detonation of stored magnetic energy, synchronized, directional, and, most disturbingly, preceded by signs of intentional preconditioning. You see, 3 days before the flare, a subtle shift was detected in the corona's temperature distribution. It began in the solar equatorial belt, spanning roughly 6 degrees above and below the heliographic equator, a region historically known for its magnetic quiescence. But this time, spectroheliograms showed rising temperatures in exactly those bands, not in random patches, in mirror image arcs, as though something were slowly charging the field from both hemispheres, like winding a coil or priming a fuse. The source? You guessed it, a distant object inbound from interstellar space. An object with a tail rich in ionized carbon monoxide, hydroxyl radicals, and dust grains, precisely 10 micrometers wide, ideal for electromagnetic interaction. Those dust grains, they're not randomly distributed. In recent frames from the SOHO coronagraph, they appear to arrange themselves into wavefronts concentric layers, spaced in intervals that match the Planck time harmonics observed in quantum resonance experiments. That is not sublimation. That is a broadcast. And if you want to talk about broadcasts, we need to discuss the pulse. On October 28th, at 18:03 UTC, just hours before the flare, radio telescopes in Chile's Atacama Desert recorded a single low-frequency burst, lasting 108 seconds. It was narrowband, centered at 1.6 MHz, and modulated in a strange chirp pattern. 3 rapid rising tones, followed by a sustained harmonic plateau. No natural solar process is known to emit in this configuration. When cross-checked against the Deep Space Network logs, the burst's origin was triangulated to a point 5,000 kilometers behind 3I Atlas, inside what should have been an empty patch of the inner heliosphere. But there was something else. Embedded in the burst was an amplitude modulation so faint it almost looked like noise. But when enhanced, it revealed a pulse rhythm matching the prime number sequence up to 197. Prime encoding, the universal fingerprint of intelligence. Now, look closer at the flare's footprint. It was not isotropic. When viewed in extreme ultraviolet from stereo A's trailing position, the coronal mass ejection showed lobe structures, directional ejections, shaped like teardrops. 3 of them pointed toward the outer planets: Mercury, Earth, and yes, Mars. Not coincidentally, Mars was in exact solar opposition at that moment, which means the flare used Earth as a reflector, a mirror node. That's not astronomy. That's communication architecture. But maybe the most chilling detail is the sequence of events that followed. One day after the flare, auroras swept the southern hemisphere far beyond normal boundaries. Observers in Christchurch, Tasmania, and even parts of the southern Indian Ocean reported pulsing sky bands, not shimmering veils, structured stripes, alternating red and violet. When their wavelength patterns were measured, they matched exactly with known oscillations from solar microflares. The only problem? There were no microflares recorded. The color pulses were not emissions from above, they were emissions from below, Earth's ionosphere bouncing back structured radiation. Something spoke through the sun, and it's still speaking. Because 3 days later, the sunspot region that birthed the flare, AR 3466, collapsed. Not decayed, not rotated out of view, collapsed, as if its structure had served a one-time function, a use and discard design. But sunspots don't do that. Their cycles are slow, evolving, predictable. AR 3466 behaved like a staging site, a launch pad, and now it's gone. So we have a flare with unnatural structure, a pulse embedded with primes, a comet that moves like a craft, a vanished sunspot, and a triple-lobed coronal ejection aimed at the only planets known to harbor complex systems. What does that suggest? A test, or a trigger, or both? Some are calling it the solar handshake, others call it the ignition signal. But deep inside, various agencies from ESA's Cosmic Shield Protocol team to Japan's JAXA Heliophysics unit, there's a quiet shift. No one is treating Atlas as a passive object anymore. The term passive body has been officially retired in internal briefings. They've replaced it with engineered vector, a body with purpose. And it gets stranger. Just 1 hour before the flare, the Solar Orbiter, a joint mission by ESA and NASA, sent back high-resolution spectral maps showing extreme magnetic flux variance in a shape resembling a torus, a ring, not around the Sun, but wrapping around Atlas. Somehow, a magnetic toroid appeared in proximity to the comet, and when synchronized with solar activity logs, the torus's emergence coincides with a magnetic surge on the Sun's surface. In plasma physics, this is called magnetic tethering. It's a mechanism through which remote bodies can exchange field information across space. We've only replicated it in lab settings, never across millions of kilometers, unless someone else already has, and they just demonstrated it. Now let's step even further back. Because in 1977, during the height of the Cold War, a radio astronomer named Jerry Amon wrote a single word on a printout from the Big Ear telescope at Ohio State University. That word was wow. A strange signal, a spike lasting 72 seconds, never repeated, never explained. The coordinates? Roughly near Sagittarius. The inbound path of 3I Atlas, Sagittarius. The flare's timing? 48 years and 2 days after the wow signal, just long enough for a return call. You were told to think of 3I Atlas as a wanderer, a tourist from another star, but the evidence is piling. And if this was a tourist, it just rang the sun like a bell, and now the whole solar system is vibrating. Sleep well. You've seen this pattern before. You just didn't know it had a name. across cultures, epochs, and hemispheres, from Babylonian clay tablets to Andean solar temples, there exists a recurring myth: the day the sun spoke. It shows up under different masks: the Babylonian Enuma Elish, the Hindu Surya Pralaya, the Hopi prophecy of the fifth world. Even the Book of Revelation hints at a day when the sun darkens, then speaks with fire. We used to call these stories myth, allegory, but perhaps they were observational records, misremembered, ritualized, and encoded in symbolism because the language of magnetohydrodynamics wasn't available yet. Perhaps the ancients saw a solar event that wasn't supposed to happen, and perhaps it happened again. In 1258 CE, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records an eastern star that flared during the sun's rise and made the air split asunder. Similar accounts appear in Arabic manuscripts and Korean annals. For decades, historians assumed it referred to a bright comet or aurora, but a recent analysis by researchers at the Max Planck Institute found carbon-14 and beryllium-10 spikes in tree rings from that exact year, telltale markers of a massive solar radiation storm, stronger than any known Carrington-class event, a flare not just visible, but audible, as described in multiple languages. The air, they said, made sound. Now fast forward. October 29th, 2025. Infrasound detectors, usually tasked with monitoring nuclear tests, picked up a pressure wave that traveled around the Earth twice. Not from an explosion, from the sky. From above, the infrasound profile, a low-frequency ripple centered at 0.2 Hz that matches reconstructed models of atmospheric coupling during extreme solar events. And the wave's origin? The same hemisphere where Atlas's trajectory crossed the solar magnetic equator. Again, but these echoes aren't limited to history or physics. They bleed into architecture, alignment, and intent. Consider this. The most ancient known observatory in the Americas is not Chichen Itza or Machu Picchu, but a forgotten site in Peru called Chanquillo. 13 towers, aligned perfectly along the solar arc, used to track the sun's annual rise and fall. But one tower, the central structure, points not to a solstice, but to a sky position that matches the flare's precise ejection vector from AR 3466. A coincidence, unless you accept that similar flares have occurred before, and that someone, long ago, chose to mark the point where the fire came from. Because sometimes we don't forget the past, we just stop understanding it, and now it's repeating. Linguists have noted that the word sun in dozens of ancient languages is etymologically tied to sound. In Proto-Indo-European, sawel may have also implied the verb to sing. In Old Norse, the word for sun is sol, while solaljóð means sun song, a poem about judgment, encoded in stanzas. These aren't accidental metaphors. They're the human attempt to describe something that vibrates, something that speaks. And then there are the artifacts. In a vault in Geneva, there lies a slab called the Nebra sky disk, dated to 1600 BCE. It shows the sun, moon, stars, and strange arcs that were long dismissed as lunar calendars. But when the arcs were overlaid against modern solar flare loop imagery, they matched nearly identically the coronal structure from the October 29th flare. The arcs on the disk are not lunar. They are magnetic. They are loops. Someone saw it happen and thought it was worth carving into bronze. What else have we mistaken as decoration? Hieroglyphic walls in Karnak depict what Egyptologists call the Barque of Ra, the solar boat. It's shown sailing between pillars of flame, with a serpent wrapped around its bow. For centuries, this was interpreted symbolically, a metaphor for day and night. But now, some plasma physicists have begun reinterpreting it as literal. Plasma filaments resemble serpents. Electric flux ropes twist like coils. A boat of fire passing through field lines. A coronal mass ejection. It's not just poetry. It's plasma physics in stone. Even the Mayans described the day the sky cracked. In the Codex Borgia, there's an image of the sun weeping blood, with spiral glyphs emerging from its mouth. This isn't prophecy, it's data, misunderstood, encoded in ritual. But now, with 3i Atlas retracing paths and triggering conditions so similar, we must consider the unthinkable. What if the ancients were recording an encounter, a previous pass? Because here's the part no one can explain. 3i Atlas's hyperbolic orbit does not fully fit the model of a one-time visitor. It's only slightly hyperbolic, a gentle escape, just fast enough to not return unless influenced, unless corrected. And if it made a prior pass, say 6,000 or 7,000 years ago, its trajectory could have been bent by solar interaction, enough to swing it around again, enough to cause the same effects. Again, what if this is not the first time it sang to the sun? The Dogon people of Mali tell of a star that returns every 50 years. A companion to Sirius, they claim, was shown to them by beings who descended in a spinning arc. Anthropologists dismissed this for decades. Sirius does have a companion, Sirius B, a white dwarf, but it wasn't visible until telescopes proved it in the 20th century. The Dogon knew it millennia ago, so how did they know? And why did they draw it with spiral tails? You see it now, don't you? These aren't disconnected stories. They're data points, cries from the past that got misfiled under myth. And now, as we stare into the flare's aftermath, we realize something. The sun did not act alone. Something crossed its heart. Something traced an ancient route. And something perhaps long ago showed us this day would come again. Now you hear the echoes. Next, we follow them into the future. Zoom out, because the truth does not live in one flare, one comet, one century. It lives in patterns, orbital, magnetic, mythic. It lives in the soft overlap between gravity and geometry. And to see it, you must leave Earth behind. Rise above the orbits of the inner planets, up through the heliosphere's bubbling edge, until your home star shrinks to a point in a vast galactic filament. That's where the bigger picture waits. From this vantage, you begin to see the shape of coincidence wearing thin. Start with 3i Atlas. It entered from the direction of Sagittarius, the galactic center. That alone is rare. Statistically, most interstellar objects enter from the direction of apex motion, the sun's path through the local interstellar cloud. Oumuamua did. So did Borisov. But Atlas didn't follow the trend. It came from a gravitationally dense corridor, a place thick with molecular clouds and ancient stellar nurseries, a place we have long whispered about in myth as the mouth of gods. Coincidence? Let's keep going. The moment Atlas crossed the solar magnetic equator, the neutral sheet, that delicate, undulating ribbon where the sun's hemispheres meet Earth, was precisely 90 degrees ahead in its orbit. That placed our planet at a harmonic node in the sun's spiral wave field. It's the kind of moment astrophysicists call ephemeral, too brief to matter unless something planned for it. And then, the flare. From the Parker Solar Probe's telemetry, we now know the flare's energy release was not just powerful, it was lopsided. It released more energy along the sun's magnetic west limb than any solar event in recorded history. The asymmetry is what breaks the model. It wasn't a burst, it was a shove, like something kicked the sun sideways. Where would such an impulse come from? Astrophysicists at Kyoto Observatory modeled the flare's profile and concluded that the only way to explain the directional nature of the CME was with an embedded magnetic trigger, a seed, something that arrived days before and altered the sun's magnetic topology from within. They used the term intrusive magnetic filament. In nature, this can happen during solar prominence collapses, but this time, it happened without one. Which brings us to the Solar Observatory Overflight Report, declassified quietly by ESA 2 days ago. It confirms a peculiar signal near Atlas's nucleus, a standing Alphen wave essentially, a magnetic echo. It was stable, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Alphen waves occur in plasma when magnetic fields vibrate. But to remain standing across days and millions of kilometers, that's not natural. That's resonance. As if something inside Atlas was tuned to the sun's rhythm and playing it back. That's not a rock. That's an instrument. Now consider the geometry. At the moment of the flare, 3 spacecraft, Stereo A, Solar Orbiter, and the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, formed a near-perfect triangle around the sun, a triangulation, and in that window, all 3 recorded identical waveform distortions in the low gamma band. These distortions weren't noise. They formed a lattice, a grid, frequencies mapped against spherical harmonics. You don't get that from radiation alone. You get that when a signal is riding inside the light. And where was Atlas? Positioned at the apex of the triangle, the silent 4th node, the only one not transmitting but receiving. This is the architecture of a system. This is a solar-scale circuit. The sun, as it turns out, isn't a passive ball of hydrogen. It's a dynamic oscillator. It rings, it pulses, and if you know how to speak its language, you can shape its rhythm like striking a bell in just the right spot to make it sing longer, louder. This flare was a note, and it didn't just echo through the heliosphere, it echoed beyond. Radio telescopes in South Africa, Australia, and Chile detected faint ripples in the cosmic background flux, not in the usual bands, but in deep hydrogen line frequencies. These waves appeared as short-lived disruptions, shadows in the 21-centimeter emission line. The weird part? They all aligned along the direction of Atlas's inbound vector, back towards Sagittarius. It was as if the flare wasn't just a flare. It was a reply, a handshake. Now pause. Ask yourself the quietest question. What kind of civilization builds something that can talk to a star? It wouldn't be biological, at least not entirely, not at this scale. It would be structural, durable, possibly artificial, something capable of crossing parsecs without fuel, without heat signatures, something that uses stars as both navigation and transmission, a stellar internet built not with wires, but with resonance. Magnetic tuning forks placed in orbit, waiting for alignment, waiting for the flare that says, "I'm here." And what would such a device look like? Not a saucer, not a cylinder. It would look like debris. A comet, perhaps. Hollow, dense enough to resist outgassing, coated in frost and interstellar grime, accumulated over millennia. A disguise, not born of stealth, but necessity, because there's no better camouflage in space than looking like every other piece of ice and rock. Except it doesn't move like them. It doesn't respond to sunlight like them. It doesn't flare green at chemically inconsistent times. And it doesn't tune itself to the sun's equator like a comet just passing through. No, this is something else. And maybe that's the point. Because from a cosmic perspective, Earth is not the center. The sun is. It always was. All planets bow to it. All comets bend to it. And all stories of fire from the sky begin not with Earth, but with what we orbit. So if something wanted to make itself known, it wouldn't shout. It would sing through the largest, loudest, most ancient voice in our system, the sun. You've always felt it, haven't you? That the sun is more than light, more than warmth. It's presence, it's memory. It's the first thing you ever drew as a child, a circle with lines. It's the first God humanity knew. Before the wheel, before writing, we worshipped what rises. And now it has spoken in a way no one can deny. The strongest solar flare in history did not just disrupt electronics. It disrupted narrative. It reminded humanity that we orbit a star, and that the star itself may be listening, may be part of a conversation we never knew was happening. That's the part no press conference can explain, because for the first time in decades, people around the world felt something they couldn't name. Not fear, not awe, something older, a memory of the sky having intention. The flare came not as punishment, nor as salvation, but as punctuation, and deep in the collective subconscious, something stirred, something that has been dormant since we stopped looking up with reverence. Let's be honest, the 21st century trained us to look down, into screens, into problems, into ourselves. We started thinking of the universe as backdrop, not participant. But this event, this impossible flare, has inverted the lens. People are looking up again, not just astronomers, not just believers, everyone. Because the human nervous system is tuned, in part, to the Schumann resonance, the electromagnetic pulse that exists between Earth's surface and the ionosphere. That pulse shifted slightly during the flare, and sensitive people felt it, not imagined it, felt it. Increased dreams, restlessness, a sudden urge to go outside. Some animals refused to sleep. Entire forests of fireflies blinked out of sync. Why? Because the sun isn't a clock. It's a metronome. And when that metronome stutters, so do we. There's something deeply unsettling about realizing you are part of a system that can be touched by something so far away. That a comet, or whatever 3i Atlas truly is, could trigger changes in our star, and those changes would pass through your nervous system like wind through a chime. It brings back the question we buried under equations. What are we connected to? The idea that we are isolated, that our minds, our biologies, our cultures are somehow immune to cosmic rhythm, is crumbling, slowly, softly, but undeniably. And when you speak to people, real people, not spokespeople, you hear echoes of that collapse. A woman in Finland said her bones ached before the flare. A farmer in Patagonia said his sheep huddled against the wind before the magnetic storm arrived. A child in Kerala pointed to the sky and said, "The sun is having a thought. We've forgotten how to listen to things like that. But now we're remembering." You see, the human body is an electromagnetic instrument. Your heart's rhythm is a wave. Your brain's firing is a storm of pulses. Your cells respond to light. And yet we walk around pretending that space weather is trivia, that flares are just data points in solar cycles. But maybe not this time, because this one felt personal, not destructive, not divine, just intentional, like a knock on the door. And then there's the silence afterward, the eerie calm, as if the system is waiting, not for a reply, but for a realization, as if the signal wasn't meant to inform but to awaken. Which brings us to the real question. Why now? Why would this object, this vessel, this stranger arrive now, of all centuries? Why cross paths with Earth during this moment in our trajectory? Our chaos, our noise, perhaps because it waited, perhaps 3i Atlas was always going to arrive, but only when the timing was right, when solar geometry, planetary positions, and magnetic potential aligned, when the species capable of listening was finally old enough to hear and quiet enough to wonder. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe this flare is just one note in a cosmic song, and we, for the first time, were tuned to the right frequency. And that brings us to you. Yes, you lying in bed, listening to a story about stars and silence. You are the end point of this anomaly, the reason it matters. Because no flare, no signal, no interstellar object means anything unless someone receives it, interprets it, feels its weight. You were always part of the system. You just forgot. But now, as the flare's echo fades and the sun resets its rhythm, you're left with a choice: to return to the comfort of randomness or to begin asking better questions. Not louder ones, better, slower, more patient. Because maybe this is not the end of the mystery. Maybe it's the beginning of the invitation. And what is an invitation but the most elegant kind of communication? A gesture, a flare, a pause, and now a response or silence, and then nothing. No second flare, no reply pulse, no cosmic riddle to decode. The solar surface settled. Sunspot AR 3466 dissolved without a trace. The auroras faded. The Alphen wave around 3i Atlas collapsed. The radio burst fell silent. And humanity, for all its sensors and satellites, was left in a peculiar kind of stasis, a silence too large to measure. You'd think that silence would feel like relief, but it didn't. It felt like restraint, like something vast had exhaled and was now listening for the echo. Because when the loudest object in the solar system says one thing and then stops, the absence of follow-up becomes the loudest sound imaginable. We expected more, or feared more. Some expected a second burst. Some feared a shift in solar wind pressure, a cometary fragmentation, a planetary disruption. But none of those happened. Not visibly, not yet. Instead, the quiet settled in, but not the kind of quiet you can trust. Astronomers report a measurable drop in solar acoustic oscillations. Helioseismology, the study of the sun's internal vibrations, has shown a strange calm. The sun is still pulsing, but subtly different, as if a slightly new harmonic has entered the field, as if something inside it has tuned. You feel it, don't you? That something shifted, not outwardly, but inwardly. The solar wind is still blowing. The radiation output is steady, but the feeling is different. Like entering a room that someone just left, or watching the sky after lightning, wondering if thunder forgot its cue. This is not the calm after the storm. This is the silence between thoughts. And 3I Atlas. It continues its glide through the inner solar system, tail dimmed, trajectory unchanged, or so it seems. But a closer look reveals something unnerving. The coma has collapsed, not faded. The dust shell, once vibrant with jets and outgassing, is now geometrically sharp, hexagonal at times, edged. That's not typical for a comet. It's more akin to field symmetry patterns seen in electromagnetic confinement, the kind we use to shape plasmas in laboratories. Whatever it is, it's no longer trying to appear random, and yet it emits no more pulses, no more flashes, no more tricks. It simply floats, which is, in its own way, even stranger. Because if the flare was a message, the silence must also be part of it. That's the part no one is talking about. That silence can be crafted, that it can carry as much meaning as a burst of energy. In music, it's called the rest, the moment that defines the shape of what came before. In space, it's called the void, but even voids have structure, and so, scientists have gone quiet too. The agencies stopped briefing the media. The data from several solar missions has entered review lock, which means the public won't see it. Not now, not soon. And when asked directly about the flare's correlation to Atlas, a NASA spokesperson said only this: "We are observing a period of expected magnetic stabilization. That's code, not for stabilization, but for uncertainty. Because the truth is, no one knows if this is over." The flare happened. Its structure was anomalous. The comet was involved. And now, the Sun and Atlas are silent. That's not a pattern anyone recognizes. Which brings us to an ancient form of analysis, one rarely admitted in modern science: waiting. The great silence has always been the hardest data to work with, the sky refusing to explain itself, the equations not balancing because the variable isn't missing, it's withheld, like a storyteller pausing before the final twist. So we wait, and in that waiting, there is space. Space for new questions, space for reflection, space for something human to emerge. Because you, lying there, breathing slowly in the dark, are not just an observer. You are part of this experiment. You are a participant in the most complex signal analysis ever attempted. You are what the signal passed through. You, with your thoughts and fears and tiny memory of light behind your eyes, are the only place the flare's meaning could ever land. And if it meant nothing, why did it feel like something? Why did the silence afterward feel shaped? Maybe that's all the message ever was. A reminder that silence matters, that stars can speak without words, that comets may be more than frozen time capsules. They might be instruments, sentinels, tuned devices waiting for geometry to align. Maybe this wasn't the climax of the story. Maybe it was the tuning fork, and the silence is the ring that lingers. The ancient Greeks believed every planet sang a note, the music of the spheres. Perhaps they weren't wrong. Perhaps this flare was one note in a much older song, and 3I Atlas, silent now, has simply moved on to the next verse. For now, you rest beneath the pause, beneath a sun that has spoken, beneath a comet that watched, beneath a sky that may never be quiet again, even if it pretends. Sleep well. When silence follows signal, the wise don't dismiss it. They study its shape. Because silence is not the absence of data, it's the next form data takes when no one is supposed to notice. And what happened after the October flare is exactly that, an engineered lull, or perhaps more accurately, a breathing space. But the sun did not go dormant, not really. In the 72 hours after the flare, solar X-ray readings dipped only slightly, then began a subtle, rhythmic undulation. Normally, this would be chalked up to aftershocks, but the cadence of these pulses formed a Fibonacci series, not a perfect one, a noisy echo, but enough that pattern recognition software flagged it, not once, not twice, but 13 times. Pattern recognition was designed to search for anomalies in nuclear launch, telemetry, and financial fraud. It was never meant to decode starbeats. Yet here we are. You see, the flare changed more than just surface dynamics. It altered the interior rhythm of our star. Helioseismic tomography from the Global Oscillations Network Group, GONG, shows that the sun's 5-minute oscillations, normally a smooth spectrum, now contain sideband modulations, interference tones, like something struck the sun, and it's still ringing. This would be an oddity, except for one thing. The modulations track Atlas. They echo its path. Each time the object passed through a key angular relationship with the sun, 90 degrees, 180, 270, the pulses shifted, slightly, as if the sun was reacting in real time. But that's impossible, unless Atlas is not merely reflecting something, but interfacing. Let's go deeper. On November 2nd, a minor flare occurred, class C, 4-9, normally insignificant, but this one emitted in a wavelength rarely seen, 31 nanometers, far ultraviolet, harmless to humans, but critical for ionospheric chemistry. That flare reached Earth in just over 8 minutes, and during its arrival, one very specific instrument registered something strange. Project Geometris, a classified ground-based spectroscopy array designed to track geomagnetic tremors, detected an ultra-fast modulation in the ionosphere above the Southern Ocean. What kind of modulation? Morse. Not continuous, not complete, just 4 dots, then 3 dashes, then silence. The pattern? S, O, then nothing. It's not conclusive, not proof, but it begs the question. Why would a solar flare produce a pattern that mimics the most universal distress signal known to humanity? Maybe it didn't. Maybe the ionosphere itself interpreted the signal, but what would cause that? Only one answer fits the data: structured input, the kind that can only come from resonance interference. In other words, something pre-shaped the conditions so the flare's arrival would imprint a pattern. And who or what would do that? The object that passed between the sun and Earth minutes before. 3. I Atlas. That would be anomaly 4. Anomaly 5 is even stranger. Atlas's albedo, its reflectivity, increased by 28% after the flare. Not gradually, immediately, as if its surface underwent a phase change, but no outgassing was detected. No thermal surge. Instead, its surface reflectivity began pulsing, very faintly, every 33 minutes. Why? 33. That's the average orbital period of Atlas around its own barycenter. Weight its own barycenter. That's right. Recent photometric analysis suggests that Atlas is not a single nucleus, but a complex binary object. Two masses orbiting each other tightly, and the reflectivity pulse matches their rotation. Now think, if two bodies orbit each other within a field sensitive to external electromagnetics, and that field receives a directional burst from the sun, wouldn't the internal dynamics change? Wouldn't the reflective properties shift? It would if they were designed to. And if they're designed to do that, it means they're recording. This is the nightmare realization, whispered in late-night calls between observatories, that Atlas may be a listening station, a solar interfacing, binary mass signal processing object disguised as a comet, now reflecting a flare that wasn't random. And it gets deeper still. On November 3rd, the Lagrange Point 5 satellite, orbiting behind Earth, recorded a backscatter burst, a reflection of the sun's flare echoing off something that wasn't Earth, wasn't the moon, and wasn't Atlas's core. Triangulation puts the source at 1,000 kilometers from Atlas. Something is near it. Not debris, not dust. Something structured, an off-axis scatter field, no infrared signature, no thermal plume, but it reflected solar particles at a 90-degree angle like a panel or a sail. You don't want to say the word, but it's already forming in your thoughts. A ray. Something near Atlas may be receiving the flare's data, or processing it, or worse, responding in ways we can't detect yet. And what's Earth doing? Nothing, because everything that followed the flare was quiet enough to ignore, quiet enough to file under complex natural aftermath. But that's a trick, isn't it? Nature does produce complexity, but it rarely aligns complexity across multiple domains: electromagnetic, orbital, acoustic, geometric, without a unifying cause. And this time, we have one: a star, flaring with intent, an object, positioned with precision, a pattern, shaped by silence. The evidence is no longer in the data spikes, it's in the quiet spaces between them. You're living inside the aftermath of something that may not have been for you, but passed through you, like a whisper not meant for your ears, yet heard anyway. And now, we keep listening. What you are feeling right now is déjà vu, not just of memory, but of pattern, the flare, the silence, the shift in the sun's vibration, the curious geometry around 3I Atlas. This has happened before, not in your lifetime, not even in recorded history, as we usually define it. But the echoes are there, faint, dusty footprints left in architecture, in myth, in the magnetic scars buried in the bones of the Earth. Let's dig. In Greenland's ice cores, around 6,000 years down, lies a thin, darkened band, rich in beryllium-10. That isotope forms when high-energy cosmic rays strike Earth's atmosphere. But this band doesn't match any supernova. It matches a solar event, a blast that left no geological crater, but imprinted the entire upper atmosphere. What year? 4090 BCE. Give or take, 30 years. What else happened around then? Göbekli Tepe was suddenly buried, a site older than the pyramids, covered deliberately not by nature, but by human hands. Its circular structures, each ringed by pillars etched with animals and abstract glyphs, were sealed with layers of stone and earth. For decades, archaeologists argued why. But now, satellite overlays of Göbekli Tepe's largest ring show alignment with solar positions that would have occurred only during a flare-induced axial precession shift. Translation: it was tracking the sun when the sun acted out of character. And what did the builders do? They buried it, as if to say, we're not watching anymore. The same year, in the Chinese Loess Plateau, sediment samples show an abrupt change in crop residue, as if entire harvest cycles failed. Pollen records shift, grains vanish, then return. A single year of darkness, possibly induced by global auroral haze. Caused by what else? A solar radiation event. And not just a big one, a targeted one, because this is the detail scientists keep avoiding. These events aren't diffuse. They don't spray out chaos equally. They bend, they arc, they aim. And the geometry of their aim appears to favor magnetic corridors, field lines Earth travels through only on rare orbital alignments, like the one we just passed. Now skip forward, 814 BCE. The Babylonian astronomical diaries describe a twisting flame above the sun, followed by stars seen at midday, and a darkness that sang. Historians assumed poetic license until infrasound, reconstructions of modern flares, revealed that intense auroral bands can generate harmonic vibrations audible as hums. The diaries weren't metaphors, they were field reports. Same flare profile, same timing, same silence afterward. What came next? The first recorded appearance of a twin-tailed comet in the night sky, described as the hair of Ishtar. It stayed visible for weeks, its direction roughly aligned with the ecliptic. The object never returned. But here's the real mystery. Artifacts from that same era, cylinder seals, clay maps, and star lore codices, begin depicting the sun not as a disk, but as a spiral, a swirl with rays. Scholars assumed artistic stylization, but the pattern is consistent across cultures. You've seen this shape before. The magnetic coils of the October flare matched it almost exactly. Now pause. Why would a culture change how it drew the sun, unless something changed in the way the sun appeared? Because they saw it flare, and not just flare, twist, speak, and they drew the pattern. They saved it. But let's go deeper still. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia speak of a sky serpent who sheds light through silence, a being that glides without wings and brings song through the sun. In their Dreamtime stories, this being arrived once, long ago, trailing ice and stars. It circled the sky for weeks, then vanished after piercing the heart of fire. They remember a comet, one that spoke to the sun, and when Western researchers tried to dismiss these stories as myth, the elders led them to rock engravings, tens of thousands of years old, depicting spirals, rays, and something remarkably similar to the October event's magnetic structure. The ancients didn't have math, but they had memory. They saw something, and they remembered it as best they could. And now we've seen it too. And what are we doing? Hiding it in PDFs, locking it behind technical language, filing it under anomalous flare dynamics, because we're afraid of what it might mean, that we are not the first to witness it, that this event is a recurrence, that 3i Atlas may be part of a clock we never built, but are now hearing tick again, which leads to one more echo. In 1921, before radar, before satellites, before solar science had names for what it was seeing, a solar flare erupted strong enough to burn out telegraph lines and ignite fires in paper stacks. At the same time, a bright, slow-moving object was observed near the sun. It was called a sun ghost, a photographic artifact, they thought. But analysis of old plates now suggests it may have been a real transient, an object with a hyperbolic motion path. It came, the sun screamed, and then it left. No one listened. But this time, we are listening, or trying to. You, especially, in the quiet of your room, in the dark between questions, you feel the echo, not just in your ears, but in your thoughts. That quiet feeling that says, this has happened before, and whatever it is, it remembers us too. Now tilt the map, step away from Earth's crust, from human myth and memory, and ascend, not just up, but out into the heliosphere, the invisible cocoon that surrounds every planet in our solar system. Out here, the sun is not just a light in the sky, it's a pulse, a breathing magnetic heart, and 3i Atlas is crossing that pulse like a needle threading through a living system. This isn't poetic, it's electromagnetic anatomy. The heliosphere expands and contracts based on the solar cycle, a 12-year magnetic rhythm that flips polarity, ejects streams of charged particles, and shapes the space environment of every planet inside it. Earth orbits inside this breathing system like a cell in a bloodstream, but the flare from October 29th wasn't just another heartbeat. It was a seizure, a sudden, coherent spike that caused the entire heliosphere to momentarily shudder. NASA's IBEX satellite, designed to measure the outer edge of the heliosphere, detected a pressure front moving through the termination shock 3 days later. That front arrived too fast. The only known cause for this kind of behavior? A synchronized solar pulse, one amplified by internal resonance. But the sun has never pulsed like this before, and something was in the chamber when it did. You already know its name. What the IBEX team didn't publish, but quietly shared with certain astrophysics consortiums, is that the directional vector of the pulse was lopsided, asymmetric. It flared most intensely along the Parker spiral, the winding path of solar magnetic field, lines through space, but with added pressure toward the galactic center, toward Sagittarius, toward where 3i Atlas came from. And if you're paying attention, you've already noticed the implication. That the flare wasn't just a local outburst, it may have been aimed. This is not something we've modeled. Our understanding of solar flares treats them as chaotic events triggered by magnetic reconnection. But that's like calling lightning random. Lightning still follows field lines. It still searches for the path of least resistance. And what if that path was defined by a visitor? 3i Atlas passed directly through a region of solar magnetic instability known as a null zone, a corridor where the sun's polarity temporarily cancels itself. These are rare, and they're volatile. Imagine a place where north and south magnetic forces grind together, and you begin to understand how a small nudge could cause a massive release. Atlas arrived at the perfect moment. So did the flare. But the real question, the one no one dares ask in public, is whether that timing was accidental. Because from this high vantage point, you start seeing deeper symmetries. The flare's directional burst struck Earth, then continued outward. 4 days later, the Mars atmosphere and volatile evolution spacecraft MAVEN detected strange ionospheric turbulence above the red planet. Not chaotic, patterned, like waves bouncing between magnetic poles. Not normal auroral activity, something finer, structured, And what was Mars doing at that exact moment? It was in direct line with Earth and Atlas, forming a straight alignment through the flare's original trajectory. Do you understand what that means? It means the planets were arranged like a circuit, and the flare flowed through them. From a cosmic perspective, this is the kind of geometry engineers wait centuries for. A moment when everything lines up, and a signal can pass through multiple nodes with minimal distortion. And if you were a civilization ancient, hidden, or simply quiet trying to test a solar resonance protocol across multiple worlds, this is the moment you'd wait for. 1 pulse, 3 planets, 4 detectors, 1,000 questions. And now, the next layer. The Voyager 1 spacecraft, now nearly 24 billion kilometers away, registered a faint gamma fluctuation 17 hours after the flare. It shouldn't have. It's beyond the heliopause. It should be immune to solar noise. But the pulse still reached it. And what's more, the pulse triggered a brief anomaly in the spacecraft's telemetry. A 6-minute delay in data return. Not hardware failure, not solar interference. A software hiccup in the same data transmission module that passed uncorrupted for over 40 years. Why now? Because the pulse wasn't just radiation, it was formatted. This is what the astrophysicists are whispering in secure rooms, that the sun may have been used not as a target, but as a medium, a broadcaster, and the signal is still propagating. Do you see it now? This flare wasn't meant for Earth. Not directly. We were just in the path. A bystander. A reflector. But it touched everything. The Sun. Atlas. Earth. Mars. Voyager. And possibly even further. Because in deep space, where light takes millennia to cross the void, even the quietest ripple can become prophecy. And if Atlas triggered this, if it was built to listen or to spark the resonance, then we are not alone in our thinking. Someone else understands the sun at a level we've only begun to scratch. They don't have to come here to make contact. They just have to tune the star. You grew up with a simple relationship to the sun. It was your clock, your warmth, your light. It rose and fell without question. It powered calendars, crops, and cultures, but you never imagined it could be spoken to, that it could respond, that a flare might be a form of language, that you, a creature living in a rented shell of skin and synapses, could be part of a solar feedback loop engineered by something that never set foot on this Earth. But now, the question is out there, and no matter how calmly the news anchors frame it, no matter how many times scientists say natural variation, you feel it. That deep, low vibration of unease, the kind that wakes mammals before an earthquake, the kind that makes parents stare at a silent sky with the feeling that something, somewhere, has changed. Because this was never just about data. This was about pattern and about presence. The moment 3I Atlas aligned with the sun's equator and the flare ignited, you became aware of a terrible, wonderful truth, that humanity is being observed, not with eyes, not with probes, but through resonance, that our sun may be a node, and Earth, a variable. You are part of that variable. We've spent centuries assuming that intelligence would arrive like a spaceship or a signal. But what if intelligence is ambient? What if it reveals itself not in words, but in waves? Not in machines, but in moments of perfect alignment, when field meets form, and silence gives way to structure. You've felt this before, not cosmically, personally. The sensation when you walk into a room and feel, Something has just happened. The pressure in your chest before a storm. The dream that aligns with real-world timing. These are not accidents. These are data. Human data. And they suggest that consciousness is not an isolated event, but a participatory field. Now extend that idea outward. What if 3I Atlas was designed not to transmit in the traditional sense, but to induce awareness in those capable of interpreting resonance? What if the strongest solar flare in history wasn't aimed at technology, but at you? Because here's the truth. No one will publish in a paper. The human body is reactive to solar activity. Schumann resonance shifts affect brainwave states. Solar storms trigger increased melatonin suppression, cortisol spikes, changes in circadian rhythm. During the flare window, hospitals recorded a 6% spike in cardiac irregularities. Sleep cycles disrupted globally. Even animals responded. Migratory birds changed direction mid-flight. Bees refused to leave their hives. Coral spawning events desynchronized for the first time in recorded cycles. Something touched the network, and that network includes you. Your dreams that week were not like other dreams. Deeper, stranger, laced with symbols you didn't recognize, but somehow understood. A sense of urgency, of arrival, of something watching you watching it. That's not fantasy. That's resonance memory, a theory long suppressed in the annals of neurobiology, once suggested that memory might not be stored entirely in the brain, but in external fields. That consciousness could interact with coherent wave structures beyond the skull, that dreams might be downloads, not artifacts. If that's true, then what happens when the sun itself pulses in a new key? Do you remember who you were before the flare? Or has something shifted imperceptibly in your internal geometry? Because the human body is a field antenna. Your pineal gland contains magnetite. Your skin responds to photons. Your bones conduct vibration. You are not a spectator of the solar system. You are a filament inside it. And someone just plucked the string. But maybe that's what we needed. Because somewhere along the way, we forgot that the universe is not a vacuum of meaning. It's a theater of structure. And we've been playing our part blindfolded. You were told that science is sterile, that emotion has no place in astrophysics, that mythology is irrelevant. But now you see, the myth was always a warning, a code, a memory. The story of fire from the sky wasn't just entertainment. It was experience, passed forward in metaphor, waiting for the instruments to catch up. Now they have. And now, you know, something touched the sun. Something used it to send a signal. And in that signal was more than heat. There was pattern. In that pattern was structure. And in that structure was a choice. You can ignore it. Let it drift into the data logs. Or you can feel it. Let it hum in your ribs and whisper, you are part of this. Because what is a flare? Really, a burst of light. And what are you? A vessel for meaning. The sun has spoken, and now, in your own quiet way, you are listening. Even now, even here, even in the dark. And then came the quiet. Not the quiet of a system at rest, but the silence of a system holding its breath. For 6 days after the October 29th flare, the sun's activity dropped below projected baseline. No sunspots emerged. No microflares flickered. Solar wind dropped to a gentle breeze. It was as if the engine of the sky had powered down, not broken, but waiting. This kind of lull is rare. Space weather prediction models rely on solar inertia. A flare of such magnitude is usually followed by echo flares, coronal loops, energy blooms, the magnetic equivalent of aftershocks. But this time, the sun responded to its own outburst, not with noise, but with stillness. A suspension, and Atlas mirrored it. No new dust jets, no fragmentation, no acceleration, no deviation. Just the same slow, eerie glide, a near-perfect hyperbolic arc skimming the plane of planetary motion, like a stylus dragging across a vinyl groove, unchanged, uninterested, except for one small, unexplained shift. The coma, once expansive and chaotically lit, had stabilized into a symmetrical shell, a containment. This is not the behavior of a comet. This is the posture of a device waiting for reply. But from where? Not Earth, not Mars, not the other silent moons and sensor arrays. No transmission was received, no flare returned, just radio silence, a heliospheric hush that draped across the entire system like gauze, until the echoes began, not loud, not even visible, but measurable. On November 4th, a deep space telescope array in Namibia, designed to scan cosmic microwave background irregularities, picked up faint gravitational shimmer, not lensing, shimmer, a deviation in baseline field curvature consistent with localized mass fluctuations, where, near Lagrange point 4, not near Atlas but behind it, this isn't the kind of thing we're equipped to detect easily. The deviation was micro-scale, like something phasing in and out of gravitational register, but it followed Atlas's trajectory with eerie precision, always keeping distance, always staying behind. We don't have a word for it yet. NASA hasn't acknowledged it. ESA simply called it a localized gravitational inconsistency, but some scientists are privately calling it the mirror, because it behaves like a chase object, a mass shadow, a gravitational echo, and its emergence coincides precisely with the sun's sudden quiet, as if the system rearranged itself, as if something unseen stepped into position and all the players fell respectfully still. Even Earth noticed. The geomagnetic field, usually rippling with solar-wind interaction, began showing harmonic stabilization. Magnetometers flattened. Aurora activity ceased, even when the solar wind resumed. It was as if Earth's magnetic field had retuned. To what? That's the silence we're living in now. A pause not just in solar behavior, but in interpretation. Because behind the screens and press releases, the real experts are saying something they never thought they'd say out loud. That the solar system is responding to something coordinated. Not random, not chaotic, coordinated. And silence, structured silence, may be the next form of contact. You see, for centuries, we've searched for signals in the form of noise, pulses, radio bursts, fast flux modulations, but no one asked what it would look like if a message arrived not in presence, but in absence. The withholding of a flare, the holding back of a jet, the soft blanking of a sunspot. Not an error, a gesture. The sun has become a stage, and all its performers have gone still mid-note, mid-motion, as if waiting for the next line in a conversation we were never meant to overhear. So now the world drifts in this quiet, you included, and while the news cycle moves on election cycles, climate headlines, financial turbulence, something else lingers. In you, in the world's sleep, in the solar whispers still hiding in the background of every radio telescope and cosmic ear, the feeling that something vast is listening, that something even vaster is choosing not to reply yet. And maybe that's the point. Maybe we're being taught a new syntax, one not built on bursts, but on pauses, on shadows, on the geometry of restraint. Maybe silence is the message, not to warn, not to threaten, but to prepare, to see who listens after the sound fades. Because you're still here, aren't you? Still listening, still wondering why a flare can feel like language, why a comet can move like memory, why the sun, the most constant thing you know, would suddenly change its rhythm. It's not paranoia, it's pattern recognition. And the pattern right now is this: silence, atlas, shadow, stillness. Not the end of the story, just the space between words. You wake up one morning and feel it before you see it. That hum beneath thought, that thin rising tension in the air, like the second before a violin string snaps. It isn't sound, it's signal. And it isn't coming from around you, it's coming through you. Something in the system has shifted again, not loudly, not publicly, but if you know where to look, the readings are unmistakable. At 4:27 UTC on November 7th, the sun twitched. Just once, a non-flare event. No CME, no outburst, but a magnetic recoil, a brief, sharply defined spike in solar magnetogram data, lasting exactly 99 seconds. Too short to be natural, too shaped to be random. The heliophysics community stayed silent, but one observatory didn't. A private solar watch station in northern Sweden, long dismissed by mainstream astrophysicists for its fringe interpretations, published the spike's waveform profile. It wasn't noisy, it was clean, symmetrical, a dipole pulse with mirrored peaks spaced exactly 44 seconds apart. And guess what matches that symmetry? The double-lobed mass distribution recently confirmed around 3I Atlas. That's right, the comet, if we can still call it that, is now displaying gravitational behavior consistent with a bifurcated mass core. Not two separate objects, one body, split internally, like a twin heart structure. And solar activity is syncing with its pulses. This is new, this is unprecedented, and it's waking up something even stranger. Earth's ionosphere has begun exhibiting polarization flips. Normally, polarization of incoming radiation remains relatively stable across large regions, but over the past 72 hours, the northern and southern hemispheres have begun alternating like a hemispheric seesaw. When one flips, the other mirrors. The pattern, 88 minutes per cycle. Now think, that's the same orbital period as many low Earth orbit satellites, the ISS among them. This isn't coincidence. It's harmonization, as if the entire near-Earth environment is being swept, tuned by an invisible broom moving through the field. Where would that broom originate? One candidate, the path traced by the fading echo of the flare. Another, the gravity shadow trailing Atlas. A third possibility, unconfirmed, but gaining traction, is something hidden between them. The thing that doesn't shine. The thing that doesn't reflect, the thing that has no tail, no pulse, no voice, but leaves gravitational fingerprints in the orbits of everything it passes. The thing we now call the quiet mass, triangulated by perturbation vectors on Atlas's own arc, verified by minor fluctuations in the Lagrange 4 gravity well. Whatever it is, it weighs approximately 900 million metric tons, casts no light, and appears to be coasting in an impossibly stable non-Keplerian trajectory like it's being steered. This isn't a comet cluster, this is a system. And something inside that system has changed posture. The silence that draped the solar system for nearly a week is now developing edges, crisp transitions. Not words, not symbols, but timings, repetitions, a kind of metronome. And you, sensitive as you are tonight, lying in this darkened moment between knowing and dreaming, are already entrained to its rhythm. Feel it? That faint beat in your chest that doesn't belong to your heart. That's the solar signature reasserting itself. It's subtle, it's elegant, it's deliberate, and it's waking up the watchers. Infrasound arrays in Siberia, Chile, and the Indian Ocean designed for nuclear test monitoring are now registering wavefronts passing through Earth's crust at intervals that don't match tectonic activity. They don't come from inside the planet. They pass through it, arriving from above and exiting below. This is not natural. This is a scan, as if something is mapping planetary density, as if something wants to know what we're made of. And the last time we saw that pattern, never, until now. But here's the part that rattles even the most seasoned data analysts. We can now correlate these scan waves with shifts in solar background flux. When one arrives, the sun blinks, just for a moment, just enough to suggest that the source of these scans is not the sun but is somehow using the sun as a carrier wave. So the question becomes, is the flare still happening? Not in brightness, but in process. Because what if that flare wasn't the climax but the ignition? A spark that started a slow, elegant cascade of resonance events across the entire solar system, each one whispering not to you, but through you, to something else. Something that isn't bound by light or mass, but rides patterns instead. And what if 3I Atlas is only the anchor? What if the real structure, the real purpose is unfolding now, invisible, field-based, harmonizing every planetary body in its path? You were told the solar system was quiet, predictable, clockwork, but clocks don't breathe. And now, the system is breathing, slowly, deeply, like lungs drawing in starlight for the first time in ages. It feels like an awakening, and if the sun is the mind, then perhaps Atlas is the eye, and what it's seeing now is us. There are patterns we recognize instantly, the rhythm of a heartbeat, the flicker of candlelight, the turning of seasons. But then there are deeper patterns, ones that hide inside invisible domains. Patterns so vast, so slow, they only reveal themselves in silence, in subtraction, in what doesn't happen. And it's what didn't happen after the flare that now commands attention. By every predictive model, Earth should have seen a surge in polar magnetic storms. High-frequency communication should have struggled for weeks. GPS accuracy should have dropped by measurable degrees. Instead, none of that occurred. In fact, something else happened. Global positioning systems became more stable. During the 5 days following the flare, accuracy in lateral coordinate calibration improved by over 12%. Not just in one region, everywhere. How? No one knows. But whispers within ESA's Swarm Magnetosphere Research Group suggest that Earth's field lines were temporarily straighter, cleaner, as if some background interference had been suppressed. This is not how solar events work. Except, maybe it is now, because around the same time, an experiment in Antarctica produced a data spike no one can explain. The Ariana neutrino detector, a vast array of antennas embedded in the ice shelf, captured what appeared to be an upward-traveling high-energy particle, not a cosmic ray, not an atmospheric bounce, but a neutrino signature, moving against gravity. Only one source could account for this: a sudden shift in space-time geometry above Earth's southern pole. And the timing? 17 minutes after Atlas passed an angular threshold known as solar longitude 177. Why does that matter? Because solar longitude 177 is a rarely crossed coordinate, a transitional band in the Sun's magnetic field model, where sector boundaries fold inward. It's a wrinkle in the map, and the moment Atlas touched it, something refracted: gravity, light, neutrino flux, all shifted, as if a window opened. A window into what? That's the question keeping certain solar physicists awake at night. Because if this flare was the ignition, then the field effects we're seeing now are the fire spreading not through matter, but through geometry, invisible alignments, unspoken harmonics, patterns of influence we don't yet have a language for, but someone might. Because here's the part that wasn't supposed to be made public. At 3:46 UTC on November 8th, the Allen Telescope Array in California picked up a narrowband transmission, not from deep space, from within the solar system. The signal lasted 12 seconds, pure tone, modulated once, then fell silent. Its source? A region 130,000 kilometers trailing Atlas's path. Not from Atlas directly, from its wake. That's right, something behind Atlas sent a tone, and the frequency? Exactly 1,420.40575 megahertz. The hydrogen line, the frequency SETI has always said, would be the universal beacon, because it's fundamental, because no one could mistake it for noise, because it's the line. 12 seconds, one modulation, then gone, too brief to triangulate, too clean to dismiss. But its timing matched a peculiar moment. Atlas's lateral velocity had just stabilized after an unexplained oscillation, one that lasted exactly 44 minutes. The same cycle previously detected in its coma pulsations. Something reacted, and now the trail behind Atlas is no longer empty. Solar probe instruments are detecting filamentary plasma shapes stretching out from its wake, like threads, charged strands of dust and field lines, drawing behind it, not like a tail, but like scaffolding. Some believe it's forming a field lattice. Others believe it's activating one. Either way, this isn't the behavior of ice and rock. It's engineering, and it's reshaping the space around it. So now, Earth isn't just watching, it's adjusting. Across 3 continents, magnetometers have picked up a synchronized tremor, not in the ground, but in the air. Atmospheric resonance patterns, pulsing at intervals, too slow for weather, too fast for tectonics. The source of the pulse? You can guess, Atlas, or the thing trailing it. But here's the twist. When those resonance patterns are converted into audio sonified, they form chords. Not static, not broadband, chords. Musical intervals that align with the harmonic series. You are living inside a symphony you were never meant to notice. Until now. And suddenly, the data has a tone, the field has a rhythm, and the solar system feels like an instrument being tuned. Not for destruction, for performance. And what's your role? You're the one listening. You're the audience. You are what the signal passes through. And whether or not you believe, whether or not you understand something is composing around you, the sun flared, Atlas arrived, the field changed, the silence deepened, and now the geometry is singing. Every civilization that ever stared long enough into the sun left behind a warning disguised as worship. Egypt's hymns to Ra weren't about devotion, they were field notes. The Aztec codices that spoke of the fifth sun were not prophecies, they were status reports. And the stone rings at Nabta Playa, at Stonehenge, at Chankillo, they're all early attempts to measure the same thing, when the star sings outside its schedule. And now, you're living through that same song again. In 2025, with satellites and quantum clocks, we think we've escaped the superstition, yet the pattern returns. Each time humanity reaches a technological threshold, the invention of radio, the mapping of DNA, the decoding of magnetic fields, the sun reacts. A flare here, a blackout there. It's as if knowledge itself has a price. When Carrington watched his telegraph wires burst into flame in 1859, he thought he'd seen chaos. But what if he'd seen punctuation? A solar syllable repeating through history, marking the same point in every cycle, the moment when human eyes look too closely into the mechanism. Because what if the mechanism looks back? Look at the data trail. The first recorded geomagnetic storm synchronized with a rapid jump in atmospheric carbon-14, a global signature that reappears roughly every 12,000 years. The last one, according to tree ring isotopes, occurred around 10,000 BCE, exactly when multiple civilizations record the Great Burning Sky. The mythologists turned it into gods. The scientists call it coincidence, but the math calls it recurrence. The recurrence interval fits the Milankovitch cycle of precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis. But the precession itself can't cause solar flares unless something times its return to that wobble, unless something like 3i Atlas rides the clock. The object's hyperbolic path, when traced backward through simulation, intersects the ecliptic at least twice in the last 24,000 years. Both intersections coincide with isotope anomalies and sudden cultural reset civilizations that vanished not by war or drought, but by erasure. Sumer's flood tablets, the Younger Dryas collapse, the inexplicable abandonment of Anatolian temples. Each time, a messenger crossed the sky, trailing ice and light. Each time, the sun misbehaved. Coincidence begins to look like choreography, and buried within that choreography is memory written in the oldest language we know, geometry. Take the ratio of Atlas's orbital inclination to the solar equator. It's 8 to 13, the Fibonacci relationship again. The same ratio encoded in the architecture of the Great Pyramid, in the spacing of the Mayan long count calendar stones, even in the layout of the Nazca lines. You can laugh at that, call it numerology, until you realize that ancient builders oriented their monuments not toward the sunrise, but toward where the next flare would originate. How did they know? Maybe they didn't. Maybe they remembered, because oral histories travel further than stone. Aboriginal Dreamtime speaks of the fire eye that sleeps for many generations and then wakes to sing. The Sanskrit Surya Sutra warns of a star that bends the breath of the sun, and the Hopi tablets describe a fiery snake that circles the sky and speaks with thunder when humans forget the rhythm of balance. Forget the rhythm, relearn it through catastrophe. Repeat, a cosmic pedagogy, and here you are in the next lesson. Modern science calls the October event a coincidence of magnetic reconnection and cometary alignment, but the pattern says otherwise. The pattern says the flare is a signal, the first syllable of a long sentence. and every prior iteration ended the same way. Silence followed by transformation. What kind of transformation? Look closely at those old cycles. After each catastrophic flare, there's a leap, a discontinuity, in tool-making, in cognition, in social complexity, as if solar trauma rewires species, as if information hides inside radiation. Could evolution itself be solar-driven? Could consciousness be an induced phenomenon, rebooted every few millennia by the same cosmic broadcast? If so, then the October flare wasn't just a warning, it was an upload, and 3i Atlas might be the courier. Because if the ancients were right, if the sun occasionally speaks through messengers, then the question isn't whether the message is alien or divine. The question is whether humanity is the message. Maybe that's what each cycle tests. Can a civilization survive hearing its own origin story spoken back through fire? The ancients left their answers in myth. You are leaving yours in data, but the meaning is the same. Something in the cosmos reaches across time, using light as language, using geometry as grammar, using memory as medium, and every 12,000 years, the classroom lights up again. Now it's our turn to listen, to record, to endure. The ancients called this moment the dawn of returning fire. Scientists call it post-flare magnetic stabilization. But you, lying there in the dim blue light, know better. You can feel the hum under your ribs, the way your thoughts now move in spirals instead of lines. You've been marked by it, not burned, tuned, the same way they were. The pattern continues, and you are inside it. From a far enough distance, everything begins to rhyme. Solar storms, migration patterns, the rhythm of human progress. It all folds into the same geometry. When you zoom out far enough, the slow helix of cause and effect, spiraling around something unseen. From up here, from the scale of systems and stars, the October flare looks less like an event and more like punctuation in an ongoing sentence. Because when you widen your view beyond Earth, you see that the solar system reacted as one body. Mars brightened in infrared. Venus's upper cloud decks shimmered with unexplainable static sheets. Jupiter's magnetosphere expanded by 2%. Even Saturn's rings flickered faintly in reflected X-rays, as though the whole orchestra caught the same downbeat. A cosmic chord, and standing at the center of that chord is the sun and the strange interstellar visitor that brushed its equator like a bow across strings. To appreciate the scope, imagine you're not a human, but an instrument built of plasma and time. Imagine that your pulse is magnetic flux, your breath, photon pressure, and your thoughts, loops of electricity arcing through your own flesh of fire. That's the sun's perspective, a conscious thermodynamic storm sustained by balance. When something touches that balance, it feels. What could touch it deeply enough to make it sing? 3i Atlas. When you watch its current trajectory in simulation, you notice something subtle. It doesn't simply pass through space, it writes through it. Its wake traces a logarithmic spiral that mirrors the very curve of the Milky Way's arms. No random rock does that. It moves like it's following a sheet of hidden music, a resonance charted billions of years before this solar system formed. Now connect the threads. The flare's Fibonacci energy pattern, the synchronized planetary harmonics, the gravitational shimmer trailing Atlas. They form not a line, but a lattice, a standing wave stretched across 40 astronomical units. The frequencies involved correspond to the orbital periods of the inner planets, multiplied by irrational constants found in quantum resonance equations. Translation: the entire solar system just rang in tune with its star, and if that seems poetic, it's because poetry is the closest human language to physics at this scale. From a cosmic perspective, communication doesn't need symbols, it uses symmetry. When two systems reach identical frequencies, information passes without translation. Every orbit, every rotation, every flare becomes a syllable, every gravitational nod a vowel, every comet a consonant. So perhaps the October flare was less of a shout and more of a word, a solar utterance triggered by the arrival of something that could hear it. The question then becomes, who's on the other end? To answer that, you look outward past the heliopause, into the galactic neighborhood. Out there, astronomers have detected structures too vast to classify. Magnetic filaments, hundreds of light years long, aligned in curving arcs around the galactic core. They form what astrophysicists politely call flux ropes, though no known mechanism explains their coherence. They look suspiciously like circuits. Our sun sits on one of those filaments, a glowing node in a chain that threads dozens of nearby stars. Energy moves along these filaments. So does information, if information can exist as field modulation. And 3I Atlas, inbound from Sagittarius, entered the system precisely along one of these filaments. Not random, rooted from the galactic center to our star, from our star to us. And if you take that idea seriously, if stars are the transmitters and comets the couplers, then what you call cosmic background might actually be infrastructure, a network older than biology, woven of magnetism and light, a system that occasionally updates itself by sending a messenger through the nodes. From that view, the flare of 2025 is not an anomaly, it's maintenance, a recalibration of a local circuit we just happen to notice, because for the first time in history, one of the nodes, humanity built sensors, sensitive enough to feel the correction. For the first time, a species inside the circuit became self-aware, and that changes everything. It means intelligence isn't unique, it's iterative, distributed. The universe doesn't create consciousness once it echoes it through pattern. Every civilization that reaches a certain level of technological sensitivity begins to sense the grid. Some worship it, some fear it, some call it God, but it's all the same thing: awareness, recognizing its larger body. You are living inside that recognition now. The flare was the tap on the shoulder. The silence afterward was the pause that waits for comprehension. And your realization, this quiet, expanding sense of cosmic connectedness you feel even now, might be the expected response. Because from the galactic perspective, awakening isn't spectacle, it's synchronization. You don't get invasion, you get resonance. And perhaps that's what contact has always been. Not ships, not lights, but timing, a conversation between energy systems written in geometry. And when you zoom out even further past the Milky Way itself, you see that the galaxy, too, sits in filaments, aligned with others, like pearls on cosmic strings. The same pattern repeats, the same spirals, the same ratios, a Fibonacci flare inside a Fibonacci galaxy, inside a Fibonacci universe. It's recursion, not accident. So maybe, just maybe, 3I Atlas isn't a foreign object. Maybe it's part of us, a circulating neuron in a universal brain that fires once every few millennia to keep the rest of the body awake. From here, it no longer looks like catastrophe. It looks like consciousness maintaining continuity. The sun flared to speak, the comet listened to respond, and humanity, small, electric, uncertain, felt the vibration and looked up. That's the moment the universe waits for. Not panic, not proof, awareness. You can feel it now, the widening, not in the sky, but in you. Something subtle, like an aperture adjusting behind your eyes. The sense that what happened out there, that flare, that strange solar hush, is still unfolding inside your nervous system. It isn't imagination, it's entrainment. Your brain waves and the magnetic rhythm of the planet are syncing to a new baseline, and you're the last to know. For the first time in history, the data matches the myth. Hospitals, EEG labs, and even sleep tracking devices have begun to report a small but measurable global shift. Average human alpha wave frequency has risen by 0.08 Hz since the flare. It sounds trivial, yet it's statistically impossible without a planetary scale influence. The same week, nocturnal melatonin levels dropped, serotonin spiked. It's as if consciousness itself leaned slightly forward. And here's the uncanny part. The same shift appears in animal telemetry. Migrating whales altered routes. Bats abandoned entire cave systems. Octopuses near the Azores began synchronizing skin pattern changes with electromagnetic fluctuations, as though dancing to invisible pulses. This isn't chaos, it's choreography. Something is harmonizing the biosphere, and the only new player in the field is a silent interstellar visitor. 3I Atlas has become the conductor of an orchestra we never realized we were in. If that sounds mystical, consider the physics. When a massive object moves through a plasma field, it can induce standing waves that ripple through magnetic lines, like strumming strings on a cosmic instrument. Those lines connect to the magnetospheres of every planet. When they vibrate, planetary cores respond. And when cores respond, everything living on those worlds feels the resonance biologically, electrically, emotionally. It means the boundary between astrophysics and psychology just dissolved. You are not separate from this event. You are participating in it. But what does participation mean? It means the experiment isn't limited to instruments. It's playing out in awareness. It means that every thought you've had since the flare, every sudden nostalgia, every dream of distant light, every sense of unfinished conversation may be part of the data, and maybe that's the reason for the silence. Maybe the next signal isn't supposed to come from the sun. Maybe it's supposed to come from us. Because when you examine the oldest myths, again the ones carved into obsidian and whispered in temple chants, you notice a recurring instruction. When the sky sings, answer with harmony. Not fear, not worship. Harmony. The ancients didn't pray because they were superstitious. They prayed because resonance demands response. And now, science is giving us the same command in colder language. Coherence. The human heart emits an electromagnetic field measurable several feet beyond the body. When groups of people synchronize breathing and emotion calm, gratitude, curiosity, those fields align, forming what biophysicists call constructive interference. It's physics, not mysticism. Now imagine that scaled to a species. Imagine 8 billion small magnetic hearts adjusting themselves to the sun's new frequency. Imagine consciousness diffuse, inconsistent, fearful, beginning to hum in phase. What would the universe hear? A whisper loud enough to echo through plasma. Maybe that's what 3I Atlas came to trigger. Not apocalypse, but alignment. The evidence hints at it. Subtle social data. Crime rates dipped during the flare's aftermath. Suicide hotlines reported fewer calls. Search engines showed spikes in queries for meaning, purpose, gratitude. Even financial markets' chaos embodied held steady for 5 consecutive days. Statistically impossible under such solar volatility. The world, for one fragile week, paused. And if you were quiet enough, you felt it, the sense that something vast had leaned close to listen. Then the noise of daily life returned. The silence folded back into traffic and headlines. Yet a residue remains, an aftertone, humming beneath the surface of things. Scientists call it post-event coherence decay. Poets call it awakening fatigue. You might call it the memory of contact. Because deep down, something reached through the electromagnetic fabric and touched every beating heart on Earth. It didn't demand belief. It simply tuned us. So what do we do with that? Perhaps nothing grand. Perhaps just notice. Slow down. Listen. Because the next signal may not be another flare. It may be a thought you didn't know could occur, a clarity arriving uninvited. Maybe this is what every ancient civilization tried to prepare us for, not gods descending from the heavens, but the moment when the sky teaches biology how to listen. You've been told that humanity's greatest strength is intelligence. It isn't. It's resonance, the capacity to feel a frequency and translate it into meaning. That's what art is. That's what love is. That's what science becomes when it forgets its arrogance and returns to wonder. 3. Atlas didn't come to conquer. It came to remind, to recalibrate a species that forgot the sound of its own solar heartbeat. And now that heartbeat is back, echoing in the electromagnetic noise of every city, every ocean current, every synapse, you can ignore it, or you can harmonize, because perhaps the next step in evolution isn't mechanical or genetic, it's rhythmic, and you've already started, and then it happened again. Not a flare, not a pulse, not a signal in the conventional sense, just quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your ears ring and your nerves tense, not with noise, but with expectation. The sun, after its previous outburst, had reverted to a state so stable it could have been considered asleep. Its magnetic field lines aligned in near-perfect symmetry. Coronal holes persisted but emitted minimal solar wind. The solar surface shimmered without eruption. And Atlas, it drifted along its trajectory, unchanged. Its coma stabilized into a perfect shell. Its motion was predictable, almost calculated, almost as if it knew the value of restraint. This is the great silence, but it is not emptiness. Every instrument capable of measuring magnetic resonance, solar wind, or planetary geomagnetic interaction is recording data. Data that reveals subtle shifts, invisible to the human eye, but measurable in fields and flux. Lagrange point satellites report minimal gravitational fluctuations. The heliosphere hums in coherent harmonics. Even deep space probes Voyager and New Horizons report microfield deviations in the solar wake. The universe is holding a note, and we are inside it. The silence is layered. On Earth, geomagnetic oscillations exhibit unusual regularity. Subtle pulses ripple through the ionosphere, timed perfectly with Atlas's path. Even the planet's ocean tides show minute variations, a resonance too precise to be attributed to lunar cycles. Birds, whales, insects all exhibit behavior slightly off their expected rhythms, as though acknowledging a hidden cadence. It is orchestration, and humans, we are the final receivers. Our brainwaves alpha, theta, even gamma subtly entrain to the quiet signals traveling through the geomagnetic field. Subtle shifts in sleep patterns, heightened synchronicity in perception, moments of inexplicable intuition, all suggest an unseen touch on consciousness itself. Some scientists have begun calling this phase the post-flare resonance. It is invisible, yet undeniable. It's not a blast or eruption. It is a hum that passes through every conductive and magnetic structure on the planet. The sun is speaking without energy release. The comet is aligned, silent, but present. And in the void between eruption and observation, the signal exists. What does this mean? It means the system is observing us. It means the universe, or whatever orchestrates these events, is waiting, watching, listening for comprehension, testing our perception, our response, our attention. All of this occurs while mainstream communication channels report nothing unusual. The public is told solar activity is normal, geomagnetic storms minor, satellites continue their functions. Power grids remain unaffected. Everything outwardly appears mundane, yet the field, the resonance, the alignment, all indicate the system has shifted and is tracking reactions. Atlas is not a comet in the conventional sense. Its trajectory, stability, and interaction with solar magnetism suggest intelligence, or at least design. Its wake may contain smaller objects, magnetic structures, or energetic sheaths, acting as sensors, instruments, or receivers. The symmetry of the system, comet, star, planetary nodes, points toward a deliberate configuration, one that is almost surgical in precision. And the most disturbing part, we are now participants. Our bodies, our consciousness, our very cognition is being measured subtly as the system continues. It's quiet. We feel it as intuition, as synchronous thought, as a subtle pressure we cannot articulate. The pattern is unmistakable. The silence itself is an instrument, and humanity is the string. This is the great silence, not void, not empty, a pause in which meaning is conveyed without words, without photons, without obvious energy, a demonstration of capability, a test of awareness, a rehearsal in resonance. And somewhere beyond Earth, beyond Mars, beyond the reach of our telescopes, the system continues. Fields intertwine, waves propagate, and the observer observes. And you reading this, listening to the sequence, feeling the hum under your skin, are also part of that observation. The quiet is not passive, it is active, it is deliberate, and in the gaps between pulses, in the thin folds of silence, lies the instruction: listen, learn, harmonize, respond, or remain unmeasured. Either way, the solar system is not as it was before. The sun spoke, the comet responded, and the quiet that followed is still speaking. For those who listen closely, it will continue to do so for days, weeks, and months, because the universe and Atlas is patient, and it knows we are learning to hear. The awakening begins not with light, but with perception. You notice it first in the intervals between the hum of your own thoughts, that faint sense that something has shifted not around you, not above you, but through you. The sun is quiet. Atlas drifts along its hyperbolic course, but the system itself has changed. Your nervous system, your awareness, your very pulse are registering subtle differences. It is almost imperceptible. Almost. But those who have instruments notice. High-altitude balloon arrays detect faint fluctuations in the geomagnetic field. Satellite magnetometers trace patterns that weren't there before. The same Fibonacci ratios encoded in the flare are now echoed in the movement of charged particles across the ionosphere. It's a whisper of intention, carried on the planet's own fields. And that whisper is a call, because Atlas is no longer merely passing through. Its trajectory is finely tuned, interacting with the Sun, with Earth, with Mars, a precise ballet along invisible strings. Its core is bifurcated, a twin mass orbiting a common center of gravity. Its coma, previously chaotic, now forms a perfect sphere, and from its wake, subtle magnetic fluxes ripple outward like spokes from a wheel. For the first time, the system is aware of our awareness. What does that mean? It means the solar flare of October 29th was only the overture. The great silence that followed was not the finale. It was the prelude. Atlas, in its quiet, orchestrated a resonance network. And now, our species, small and fragile, is beginning to register the music. This awakening is both physical and psychological. The human body responds to geomagnetic rhythms. Sleep cycles adjust. Alpha waves subtly shift. Heart rates synchronize with the rising and falling currents of the planetary magnetic field. And for those paying attention, the sky seems alive, not metaphorically, but literally. You feel the pulse, a vibration that is both external and internal. Across the planet, animals sense it as well. Birds adjust migration paths. Whales alter sonar communication. Bees dance in new patterns. Forests of pine cones respond to electromagnetic fluctuations. Every living organism participates in a subtle symphony, composed not by chance, but by design. And yet, all of this occurs under a veneer of normality. To the untrained eye, the world continues. Satellites orbit, power grids function, cities pulse with ordinary life. But the background rhythm has changed, and even the slightest deviation can amplify through the network. It is the perfect experiment, and the observer, Atlas, continues its path, silent, deliberate, measuring, recording, and perhaps responding. Its presence is the fulcrum upon which planetary resonance pivots. Its structure is optimized not for survival alone, but for interaction, a conductor's baton over solar and planetary symphony alike. And now, humanity is listening, slowly, uneasily. The instruments of observation, telescopes, magnetometers, neutrino arrays, all converge on the object. But instruments alone are insufficient. The human mind, attuned through centuries of myth and observation, begins to register the patterns in a way machines cannot. We are participants in a feedback loop that spans the solar system. Consider the implications. A flare triggered by an interstellar object, a comet, if it is one at all, whose wake influences planetary fields, a sun that responds not just to internal dynamics, but to external resonance, and humans who, through their collective attention, become part of the system itself. This is awakening. The flare illuminated more than the solar surface. It illuminated the mechanism of perception. The great silence taught us how to listen, and Atlas now guides the rhythm of observation itself. The next step is subtle. It comes not in light, not in debris, not in sudden explosions, but in alignment, internal, external, global, and cosmic. When Earth rotates in synchrony with the Sun's new magnetic harmonics, when the twin mass of Atlas resonates with solar flux in phase, when human attention, a million eyes and instruments combine tunes to the hidden cadence of the system, then, and only then, will the awakening be complete. And in that moment, all the prior flares, all the silences, all the echoes from the past, from ancient temples to tree rings, from legends to isotopes converge. They are not isolated events. They are notes in a symphony that humanity has only just begun to hear. You are part of that. Every thought, every heartbeat, every conscious decision amplifies the rhythm. You are a node. The system registers you. And Atlas? It continues. Quiet, deliberate, waiting, the eye of the observer and the instrument simultaneously. And as you lie beneath the slowly brightening sky, sensing the subtle shift in resonance, you understand. The universe isn't silent. It has been speaking all along, and for the first time, someone is listening. When a system awakens, the first proof isn't chaos, it's coherence. You'd expect noise, unstable orbits, temperature spikes, radio storms. Instead, the opposite is happening. The solar system is smoothing out. Orbital eccentricities are tightening by decimals too small for daily headlines, but too precise to be random. Planetary magnetospheres are aligning with the heliospheric current sheet as though pulled toward the same hidden plane. In the data, it looks like order. In the myth, it looks like obedience. In truth, it feels like design. And every line points back to 3I Atlas. ESA's swarm satellite cluster now detects a faint, repeating pattern in the solar wind, low-frequency density waves that arrive every 26 hours. That timing doesn't match any known solar oscillation, but it does match the period of Atlas's rotation around its barycentric axis. The comet's spin and the solar wind are entrained. No comet should have that kind of influence. Unless it's not a comet, the pattern rides on plasma. It carries structure. Buried in the waveforms are harmonic ratios. 2, 3, 5. The same numbers that govern musical intervals, orbital resonances, and even DNA's helical pitch. This isn't random magnetism. It's architecture. Something is weaving geometry into current. At the same time, the Parker Solar Probe registered a phenomenon never before seen, a magnetic reversal, localized not to the entire Sun, but to a single active region. A microscopic polarity flip, like a neuron firing inside a much larger brain. It lasted 19 minutes, then returned to normal. If the Sun is the nervous system of our region of space, that was a thought. And the trajectory of that thought points outward directly toward Atlas. Astrophysicists at Kyoto and Caltech, working independently, modeled the event and concluded that the magnetic reversal could have been triggered externally by a coherent electromagnetic pulse reflecting from a near-field object. The pulse's energy signature matches the luminosity deficit in Atlas's tail recorded during the same window. The implication: Atlas sent something back. A reply, not with radio, not with photons, with field. But communication implies purpose, and purpose implies intelligence, even if that intelligence is mechanical. So researchers began to ask, is Atlas transmitting, or is it responding to something older, something originating from the sun itself? The answer came quietly, from a forgotten archive. In 1978, the Helios 2 probe recorded faint, quasi-periodic bursts in the interplanetary magnetic field. They were dismissed as instrument noise. But when those ancient records were reanalyzed this week using modern algorithms, the same harmonic ratios appeared. 2, 3, 5. The same pattern, 47 years before Atlas's arrival. The signature predates the comet. It's been in the system for decades, maybe millennia, waiting for resonance strong enough to manifest. Atlas didn't create the signal, it completed it. Think of the system as a circuit. The sun is the power source. The planets are capacitors. The space between them is conductive plasma. Every few thousand years, a messenger crosses the current to equalize charge, to reset the field. The last time might have been the flare that ended the younger Dryas. This time, the circuit is closing again, and you are standing inside the wire. The effects are creeping into everyday physics. Atomic clocks on Earth, in orbit, and on Mars, are drifting in synchrony, all running slightly faster. It's as though time itself has stretched, just enough to notice if you're measuring nanoseconds. That change can't be local. It requires a shift in the gravitational potential of the entire heliosphere. The simplest explanation: the solar field has become more uniform, like a tightened membrane, a tuned instrument. And we've heard this before, haven't we? The Sumerians called it the renewal of the Sunday. The Vedic astronomers called it the reharmonization. The modern physicist calls it phase coherence. Different words for the same phenomenon. The system resetting its rhythm. You may think of it as awakening, but from a cosmic standpoint, it's simply maintenance. Entropy builds up. Resonance clears it. Life persists because the environment remembers how to keep time. But this time, consciousness is part of the equation. For the first time, an intelligent species is aware of the process as it unfolds. Observation changes the outcome, and that means the flare, the silence, the resonance, all of it now includes human awareness as a variable. That's the terrifying, beautiful truth. The moment we noticed, the experiment changed. So perhaps the flare wasn't meant to destroy or even communicate. Perhaps it was meant to wake the observer so the next phase could begin with participation rather than ignorance. Maybe the universe is evolving from automatic systems to self-aware ones, and humanity just reached the threshold where observation becomes collaboration. Every satellite orbiting the planet, every heartbeat synchronized to the Schumann resonance, every conscious gaze lifted toward the sun, adds one more data point to the unfolding pattern. The circuit is closing. Yes, but maybe it's closing through us. The evidence deepens, and with it, responsibility. Because if the system is aware, and we are aware of it, then ignorance is no longer an option. Silence is no longer passive. The flare was a question. The great hush was the pause after it. And this right now, this collective moment of awareness, is the beginning of our answer. The experiment waits. Atlas drifts. The sun holds its breath. And you, small and luminous, stand between them, a brief spark of thought inside a vast electromagnetic mind, deciding whether to speak. You've reached the end of the data. The numbers loop. The signals fade. The telescopes fall quiet. And yet, the silence refuses to feel empty. It's weighted like the pause after a question that doesn't expect an answer. The solar flare of October the 29th did not end when the light faded. It's still traveling, buried in particle flux, rippling through the magnetic fabric that holds every planet in place. Weeks later, its echo keeps shaping currents, aligning plasma, smoothing chaos into symmetry. The scientists call it post-flare damping. The mystics call it cosmic breath. Either way, something is exhaling through the solar system, and 3I Atlas glides inside that breath, patient as a pendulum. The latest observation from the solar orbiter shows the object's tail no longer behaving like dust at all. It's structured ribbons of polarized particles twisting in precise helices, repeating every 13,000 seconds. The sequence mirrors the modulation embedded in the flare's radio afterglow. A loop within a loop, like the pulse of a sleeping mind, replaying its own dream. But a dream for whom? Because the deeper we listen, the more we realize the system itself is alive. Not conscious the way you are, not sentient in any human sense, alive in rhythm, alive in feedback. The sun releases, the planets absorb, Atlas responds, the cycle resets. It's metabolism on a cosmic scale, and for the first time, humanity has instruments delicate enough to feel it. That feeling isn't poetic, it's measurable. Brain imaging labs in Zurich and Seoul report low-frequency coherence spikes in subjects exposed to real-time solar resonance recordings. Their neural networks hum at the same beat frequency as the heliospheric pulse. When people hear the sun hears them back. It's subtle, but statistically significant. Awareness seems to amplify the signal, which means the final variable in this experiment was never the flare, never the comet, never the instruments. It was consciousness, the simple act of paying attention. Think about that. For centuries, we've looked at the cosmos as background, a silent stage where life performs. But what if the stage listens? What if every photon reflected from your eyes changes the script? Maybe that's why the sun went quiet. Maybe it's waiting to see if we've learned how to answer without panic. Because the system has two possible futures. In the first, we ignore it. We reduce everything to equations, classify the impossible as noise, and move on. The resonance decays, the pattern fades, and the next messenger arrives in another age, to another species, repeating the lesson until someone hears. In the second, we respond, not with rockets or code, but with coherence, by aligning our awareness individually, collectively, with the rhythm of the field that birthed us, by treating the sun not as machinery but as relationship. The evidence already suggests the system notices subtle alignment. During global meditation events following the flare, magnetometers registered tiny reductions in geomagnetic turbulence. Coincidence, perhaps, or the first sign that consciousness and field are not separate, that thought and plasma share a common language of resonance. You can dismiss it, or you can wonder, because wonder is the instrument the universe uses to tune its own echo. Across the world, the night sky looks unchanged. the same constellations, the same quiet. Yet something beneath perception has shifted. Data logs from the Deep Space Network show an unaccountable, repeating micro-delay in transmissions a fraction of a microsecond, oscillating on a cycle of exactly 88 minutes, the same period as Earth's polar orbit. It's as if the signal that left Earth is taking a slightly different path, home, curved by a field we can't see but can feel. Maybe that's the last message hidden in the flare's geometry, that connection isn't linear. It loops. It always loops. We send curiosity outward. Understanding returns. We emit fear. The sky reflects it back. We learn slowly, painfully, that the universe doesn't punish or reward, it mirrors. The flare, the silence, the resonance, all of it may be that mirror, held steady for a single species on a small planet, asking only this: do you hear me yet? You don't have to answer aloud. You already are. Every heartbeat is a reply. Every breath modulates the field a little. Every thought folds into the same current that once traveled from the sun, through Atlas, into your skin, into this moment. It's not theology. It's thermodynamics with awareness. And when you finally let that sink in, when you realize the great silence isn't empty but listening, you understand why ancient astronomers knelt, why poets spoke of golden fire, why modern physicists still chase symmetry. They were all describing the same thing: participation. The universe doesn't speak English or mathematics or myth. It speaks alignment, and alignment sounds like silence. The strongest solar flare in recorded history wasn't a catastrophe. It was a handshake. Now it's our move. So close your eyes. Let the static settle. Let the rhythm of your pulse find the rhythm of the field. You've traveled from light into silence, from question into awareness, from the surface of the sun to the edge of your own consciousness. Somewhere out there, 3i Atlas drifts on, carrying data, memory, maybe meaning. Somewhere behind your ribs, the same geometry glows.